Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Robert Schwarz. I'm from Germany, and I studied my undergraduates in political science and modern European history. Currently, I'm enrolled at the Graduate Institute of Peace Studies, which is a branch of Köln University. And our topic today is environmental governance in the European Union. You can see all the lights here. Do you know where it comes from? This is all from energy saving maps. You should know that. And yeah, I divide my presentation in two parts. The first part covers the leadership of the European Union in international climate policy. And in the second part, I'm going to apply the policy to a case study, which is wind energy in Germany. The first part is divided into four aspects. I will introduce the leadership dimensions, the external policy of the European Union in terms of climate change, and the domestic policy, the implementation, and finally we will look at the motivations and challenges that the European Union faces. These are the four leadership dimensions: structural leadership, directional leadership, instrumental leadership, and intellectual leadership. What these four dimensions have in common is their relative and positive connotation. Therefore, leadership in climate change exists insofar as an actor's action leads into the direction of strengthened climate protection. I will introduce each of those four dimensions and give a personal evaluation of the EU's performance in these dimensions. Structural or power-based leadership relies on the ability to deploy threats and promises. The European Union can be regarded as a quite strong structural leader due to its economic and political weight. That's why I'd like to give 4 points for the European Union as a structural leader. Directional leadership, or leadership by example, is exemplified by domestic implementation, and a directional leader shows through domestic implementation that a certain goal is achievable. Also in this respect, I think the European Union deserves 4 points because it has the most advanced domestic climate change policy in the world. The third point, instrumental leadership, uses issue linkage and coalition building. One example for successful issue linkage has been made by the European Union in the case of Russia. When Russia wanted to join the OECD, the European Union demanded that Russia also has to join the Kyoto Protocol. And through combining these issues, the European Union could advance its leadership in the international dimension. But the reason why I just give 3 points in this respect is that Europe failed to get the US into the Kyoto Protocol. And finally, we have intellectual leadership, which provides systems of thought and analytical frameworks. Normally, intellectual leadership is reserved to the scientific community, like the IPCC. But in my opinion, also the European Union can be regarded as an intellectual leader because it strongly relies on those scientific results. We can see 3 phases of the external policy of the European Union. From 1985 to 1995, the European Union was basically going alone. When an international norm was emerging in the late 80s, there were 2 reinforcing developments that enhanced the leadership of the European Union. The first one is the establishment of the IPCC in 1988, and the second one is incentives by particular member states, such as the UK, Germany, Denmark. Yeah. From 1995, when the Kyoto Protocol was negotiated, and 2001, we can see a discrepancy between the international ambitions of the European Union and the actual domestic implementation of these required policies. That means, on the international scale, the European Union had high-flying ambitions and really good targets, but they didn't do anything internally to really reduce the emissions. And the last phase, from 2001 to 2009, isn't funny that it coincides with the presidency of George W. Bush. Anyway, we crisis in negotiations internationally, and the European Union started to unilaterally commit to reducing its emissions. So how does the European Union achieve this goal? Currently we have 27 member states in the European Union, and we have the European Commission, which are 28 potential veto players. How can we merge these different interests into one position? What the European Union did is establishing council working groups. Working groups itself are nothing unusual, but those working groups, in terms of environmental policies, received more and more authority from the member states, so that they could even represent the European Union as a whole in international negotiations. And through these working groups, Europe could form a coherent negotiation position. And this position, in turn, will be represented by the member states and the European Commission at the global level. So we have a strong voice and a coherent voice of the European Union. And another thing is how those international achieved commitments are implemented domestically. In the 1990s, we saw a serious credibility gap. The European Union couldn't really achieve anything to reduce its emissions or to protect the environment significantly. This changed by the adoption of the Kyoto Protocol in 1997. Just 1 year later, the European Union agreed on a burden sharing. This means that particular member states can set different targets to meet their emissions reductions. For instance, Germany can reduce its emissions by 12 or 15%, while other states maybe just 2%. But only if the EU as a whole achieves its 8% reduction target, which is fixed in the Kyoto Protocol. The adoption of the Marrakech Accords further enhanced the leadership of the European Union. And in 2003, maybe the centerpiece of the European internal policy emerged, the Emissions Trading Directive. We already talked about a lot about emissions trading. That's why I will not explain it in detail. But since 2005, we have a working emissions trading scheme in the European Union. And lastly, in 2007, the member states agreed on an independent commitment, which has one specific feature, and this is the number 20. By 2020, the European Union wants to achieve 20% emissions reductions based on the year 1990. Furthermore, by 2020, the European Union wants to have 20% electricity from renewable energies. And by 2020, the European Union wants to reduce the overall consumption of energy by 20%. Again, 20% less emissions, 20% renewables, and 20% less consumption by 2020. So why does the European Union take such an ambitious stance in climate protection? There are three major motivations. The first one is legitimacy for the European Union, for the European integration. European public opinion is very sensitive when it comes to delivering parts of the national sovereignty to the supranational level. And European public opinion is also very sensitive when the Union itself is expanded by Eastern European states. But on the other hand, European public opinion is very much in favor of, or even enthusiastic about climate protection. So European politicians basically argue like this: hey, I know some of you don't like Bulgaria being a new member of the European Union, but on the other hand, the more member states we have, the better we can represent and further enhance the leadership of the European Union in environment protection. So it's a kind of trade-off between the politicians and the people to gain legitimacy for the integration. The second issue is very important, especially in the last years. Through a strong stand in reducing its, or in increasing renewable energies, the European Union can reduce its energy dependence. We could see in the last years that there have been several disputes between Russia and its neighbor states, and there are many fears in the European Union that energy security is in danger. So the more renewables could be set up, the less energy dependent the European Union is. And by the way, it's more environmental friendly. And the last one is strong support for multilateralism. Just imagine the European Union as a microcosm of the world itself. We have 27 member states with 27 various interests. We have richer states in the West, less rich states in the East. We have Northern European and Southern European states, states that are affected more by climate change, that are affected less by climate change. And if those 27 countries with their different interests can agree on one position, why not the whole world? So that's strong support for multilateralism. But there are several challenges that the European Union faces. It has to advance its domestic policy framework in order to remain the leading actor in combating climate change. That means the 20% target is not enough. And it has to coordinate its environmental diplomacy. Too much power still rests in the member states, so that the European Union is quite unflexible in negotiating after it has a certain policy in itself. The EU enlargement has implications, meaning that some Eastern European states are not that ambitious in climate protection. The international agenda has become broader. Several developing countries have to be included into the international climate regime. And finally, a constant challenge is to preserve and expand unity among European member states. There are external forces that always try to divide the European Union, and there are also internal disputes like the pipeline dispute between Germany and Poland. After we saw the policy framework in general, I'd like to introduce a case study. And this is wind energy in Germany. First of all, let's have a look at some facts and figures. Then we can see the legal framework that enabled wind energy to emerge. After that, we will have a look if the returns really justify the investments that have been made. And finally, we will have a look at the local people and how they accept those windmills in their neighborhood. Currently, 7% of the German energy consumption is generated by wind energy. And this new industrial branch has created more than 100,000 jobs just in a few years. And German manufacturers of wind energy are leader in the world market with a market share of 37%. How are these astonishing figures possible? Let's have a look at the legal framework. I will not explain every of those laws, but you can see from, especially from 1998, the number of electricity that is produced from wind energy is really increasing. And 1998 was the year when the Green Party, for the first time in German history, joined the government. And this new government made one very important law, and this is the Renewable Energy Sources Act. This law basically stated that renewable energies have fixed prices which are high above the normal market prices of energy, and these fixed prices are guaranteed for 20 years. So those companies who want to invest in renewable energies have investment security, and they know that they get their money back what they invest. And since then, it is really increasing, the wind energy in Germany is really increasing. And also the European Court of Justice in 2001 agreed that this law is not against European law, that this law complies with European law, and it's not a state subsidy. This so far to the legal framework. And during the winter break, I had an interview with the policy director of the German Wind Energy Association. And she explained to me the investments and returns the following. Every household in Germany invests €1 per month, through the electricity bills into wind energy. That's a huge amount of money if you see it on the whole population. But what are the returns? First of all, we have homemade energy. And this decreases energy security, as we saw, a very crucial issue. This homemade energy generates employment, jobs, especially in the rural areas. German manufacturers can sell their know-how to other countries, and currently German companies make a lot of money by selling their know-how from wind energy. We have less external effects, meaning that instead of building higher dikes due to rising sea levels or building stronger buildings due to storms, we can just invest in clean energies to decrease the external effects of climate change. Of course, it's obvious that Germany cannot do that alone, but as a good example, maybe if other countries follow, we can significantly reduce the external effects. And finally, more efficiency. You can see within 15 years, the efficiency has been, could be really developed. The manufacturing costs of wind energy could be reduced by more than 50%. And this was possible due to mass production, serious manufacturing, and the learning curve. But wind energy is not just a question of economy and good governance. It also depends on how the people accept this kind of energy. As you can see, generally, the German people are really much in favor of renewable energies, and wind is just a little behind solar and hydro energy. On the other hand, the fossil fuels and nuclear energy are very unpopular. But it's a different thing to accept wind energy in general, or to accept a windmill around the corner of the house. So, as you know, there is the NIMBY effect, not in my backyard. And this is also in Europe quite, you can also find it in Europe. But in Europe you find also another phenomenon, which is PINGBY, please in my backyard. So, how can we measure whether the people like it or don't like it? We have several indicators that show us whether wind energy is accepted or not. The first one is very obvious, geography and visual impact. The second one, former use and perception. Just imagine a former long-abandoned military base. If you build windmills on that place, I think nobody would really object. And it's another question if you put up windmills in a tourism hotspot, because tourists may not like it. This third one is ownership. Obviously, German people like more the municipality as an owner, or like small companies from that area, rather than having big companies from outside who invest in big parks in their neighborhood. And local economy is, of course, very important. In places of high unemployment, people are more likely to accept those wind energy parks. And the second set of indicators is related to the project management. The local integration of the developers, information participation, that means that you have to keep contact to local people, to journalists and so on, creating a network of support, and finally, ownership of the park and financial participation. I want to conclude with this slide, and I'd like to ask you, what do you think, which country is leading in terms of wind energy capacity? Anybody an idea? No, it's not Germany anymore. Since last year, the USA are leading. They set up 8,000 megawatt just in the year 2008. This is, I think, all-time record, which one country set up in 1 year. Germany is just close behind, and German wind energy still grows by about 2,000 megawatt a year. And the third one, anybody an idea? Another European country? It's Spain. They also are very advanced in developing wind energy and started quite early. And the fourth one, also quite surprisingly, China. They more than doubled their capacity in 2008. The fifth one, India. They are one of the few developing countries that only started to set up wind energy. If we look at Japan and South Korea, we can see that there's still a lot of potential. So far to my presentation, and I'd like to introduce 3 questions that I received from you. The first one is from Yonki. What is the difference between European and American climate policy? Which of the two takes up a more aggressive stance? And do both policies reflect their own interests or worldwide interests of environment? I think, to me, the first part is quite clear. I don't know what you think about it, but I think Europeans are more ambitious in terms of climate protection than Americans so far. But the last part is quite interesting, whether it's self-interest or global interest. But I think I could show that the motivations of the Europeans to do this kind of aggressive climate policy, climate protection, this is combined with real interests like energy security and justification for European integration. So this is like a combination of self-interest and also interest for the environment. The second question is from Umdak. As the EU plays a vital role in climate policy, there are some pros and cons for the EU itself. In the short run, the EU could get more damages than profits. Given the current economic recession, it will be more difficult for developed countries to back up developing countries at the conference in Copenhagen. Yeah, interesting question. I think, yes, it will be more difficult. We could see in Europe and also in America that the negotiations or like the forming of a position, coherent position, have been delayed until June, and that they are not as ambitious as it seemed at the end of last year. So definitely the economic recession has a negative impact, in my opinion, on the Copenhagen conference. And the last question is from Somchik. Adding to financial issues, technology transfer is another significant issue in the discourse of international climate change cooperation. How much is the level of cooperation inside the EU? Yeah, I have one example from northern Germany. I come from the northern part of Germany, and currently Denmark is very heavily investing in offshore parks at the German coast, and the other way around, Germany also, because Germany is leader in terms of onshore wind parks, is investing in other countries too. So we have a kind of technology transfer, but this is not to be understood as kind of development aid. This is just investments by countries from country A who invest in country B. So, but there is a kind of exchange within the European Union too. Okay, this was my presentation. Thank you very much.